All right. Hello. Welcome. Phil, what a New Year's, right?
It is exciting times.
I just woke up. Had a lot of champagne. A lot. And it wasn't real champagne. It was Asti Spumante or something. But how are you feeling? How's your head?
I'm surviving.
Yeah.
I think it's good to be getting back into the swing of things now. We got a couple of pretty decent cards, I would say. They've got very, very interesting main events. And it's been, I think it's been a refreshing break.
Yeah.
I think everyone has been able to relax in because the world itself has been so quiet and calm and soothing in the meantime.
I've slept through it all. It's been great, Phil. It's just been wonderful over here in the United States. There are some interesting main events. I'll tell you the strongest evidence that the break is good. It's good to have breaks between UFC events, as a fan is, I think I would probably think these undercards were a lot worse if they came right on the heels of another fight night card, if you know what I mean. These are actually some fairly top-heavy cards coming up, but we have a lot of them. And that really means that for a show like ours, where we only do one episode a week, we are not being stretched to come up with just plainly interesting fights to talk about to you. We've got 3 cards over the course of this next week, basically. The 16th, the 20th, and then again on the 23rd, I believe. And one like new UFC basic cable or network TV debut on ABC. I take it we're supposed to be excited about that or something. Then we have another ESPN Fight Night card, and then we have a big pay-per-view, Poirier McGregor 2. So at the top of each of these cards is something to get excited about, and we're happy to stretch these next two into one heavy hands episode. We've got Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. That is coming this weekend. Really a banger of a main event. I mean, the undercard could be much, much weaker, and I would still be very excited for it. Kind of a tricky fight to figure out, so I'm looking forward to getting into that. After that, we've got Michael Chiesa versus Neil Magny. We're going to jump right to the midweek, January 20th main event for segment 2. Because that is also a very enticing main event. 2 fighters who have gotten markedly better over the course of 2020. I think that's super interesting. And then we just got a bunch of stuff from the undercard, and it's not all scraps, folks. It's not all terrible. We got Santiago Ponzinibbio returning after over 2 years to fight the Leech, both of whom fought Neil Magny in their last fights, kind of weirdly enough, with very different results. Carlos Condit is fighting Matt Brown, infuriating all of the people in the world named Phil McKenzie, who would like to see Carlos Condit versus, I don't know, Stipe Miocic or something, probably. That seems like more Phil's tastes.
I mean, for the weight class, it should once again be Michel Pereira, surely.
Condit might beat him just by knowing what fighting is like.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they did give that one of those pretty cruel matchups to Condit already when they had him fight Cowboy Oliveira.
Yes, they already got them out of the way. This one is a much more appropriate Seniors League style fight. It's a bit of a bummer because Condit Brown is probably one of, I think I forgot, because it's not like a title fight or anything. It's probably one of those matchups that excited me more as a potential matchup when it was being discussed back in the day. Then it's like one of the greatest ones that got away for me. So I'll take this as a consolation prize, basically. And we've got Joaquin Buckley back again. He's fighting Alessio Di Chirico. Phil thinks he's going to lose. Crazy. We'll talk about that.
I don't.
We'll talk about that when we get to it. Should we start with this first main event, Holloway versus Kattar? I'll tell you what, Phil. I don't think this is actually that easy a fight to call. I think the casual feeling going in is, yeah, obviously Max Holloway. Max Holloway is one of the greatest champions in UFC history, no question. And Calvin Kattar is just a guy from Boston. But then you think about it for like 5 seconds, and Calvin Kattar has a lot of things in common with people that have that Max Holloway has sort of, I don't know if consistently struggled with is necessarily the right word, but what do you say? It seems like kind of a close fight to me.
I mean, one of the major ingredients of, say, like Poirier and Poirier and McGregor against Holloway is that they were just big guys who were big punchers.
Yeah.
And they were able to just push him backwards. They had approximate reach parity with him. I think actually both of them had longer arms than him.
Mm-hmm. As does Calvin Kattar. Holloway, he and Holloway are both the same height at 5'11", but Kattar has a 72-inch wingspan compared to Holloway's 69. These are Wikipedia numbers, so maybe not 100% accurate.
And you know, as a subtle and dangerous but somewhat noodly puncher, there is, you know, the possibility that he can just get drawn into exchanges with a bigger hitter who can just, if not, you know, knock him out or finish him, at least like get big round winning moments where Holloway gets staggered, as Poirier did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like that kind of matchup. So I don't know. How do we begin discussing it? Should we talk about how much Kattar is or isn't like those guys, Poirier and McGregor? Should we talk about... Well, here's an interesting angle I was considering, actually. We know one historic weakness of Calvin Kattar's is to well-utilized low kicks. Set him up well, they're going to work because he relies on his footwork to get away from things. Otherwise... the guy can move his head. He can do all of these other layered defense things, but mostly he like covers up and moves his feet. And he's so ready to do that you can absolutely just throw away punches and kick him as he moves away. Renato Moicano did it with great success. Jeremy Stevens had a lot of success doing it. Zabit Magomedsharipov had a lot of success doing it. It's happened over and over. Max Holloway is kind of good at low kicks. As we, I think, if not learned, then had strongly reinforced by his fight with Alexander Volkanovski. And I'm kind of curious to think, do you have any feeling on how much of the Holloway who fought Volkanovski in that second fight we might actually see here? Because to me, it could actually change the calculus of this matchup.
I think there's a couple of, I think there's a couple of dynamics to consider with regards to that. I mean, firstly, Holloway is still, I think, a bit of an open question. The Volkanovski fight was, as we've said before, maybe one of the smartest MMA fights we've ever seen.
Yeah,
but it still wasn't like
all the time.
It still wasn't like a blood and guts war. And it was a fight where Holloway got pushed out of it in the 5th round in a way that you might not necessarily have thought it was possible to do to Max Holloway in the past. You wouldn't have thought that he would kind of concede a 5th round for a fight that was up in the air in the way that he did in that fight. But on the other hand, he did make all the tactical adjustments that we saw that we thought would be necessary to fight someone like Volkanovski. It was another one of those like perfect strategic approaches. So if there's someone like Kattar, I think the main question is that there has to be a balance between Holloway like adopting a more kick heavy game and his sort of ability to address the other salient weaknesses of Calvin Kattar, which I think are really that he's not the most quick. He doesn't have incredible foot speed.
No,
it's a bit. I mean, also due to the fact that I think this is actually something. I think Calvin Kattar has actually become slower.
I think so. He's like more
in his
of a
time in the UFC.
He's more of a power puncher now. I think he sits down a lot more willingly. Yeah, I was going to say his hands are not even as quick as they used to be. And it's not as quick as they were in the Shane Burgos fight, for example.
And I think he's a bit slow, and I think partially as a function of that, he really doesn't like leading all that much. And again, he's someone where I think a lot of his fights have been against, aggressive opponents. So we haven't really had to watch Kattar lead. I think that probably the biggest example of this one was the Zabit fight, because I would have expected Zabit to go up early against Kattar, but I would have expected to be wrestling and kicks. In fact, a lot of it was just boxing and movement.
Yeah.
So I think basically, and I think that was because Kattar is pretty reluctant to lead unless he has a read, because I think he's a little bit like the guy he just knocked out. He's a bit like Jeremy Stephens. He needs to be standing before he can throw. He needs to be like planted, which is why he has to commit. And so I think for Holloway, it's got to be a balance between like a kick heavy game might like affect his mobility a bit more, and potentially open him up to being like countered by Kattar with a big shot. Mm-hmm. But I think more than that, it's got to be about what Zabit has success with, movement, feints, and movement. Yeah, but basically, movement and feints to diffuse Kattar and make it difficult for him to know when to throw.
I mean, honestly, you put it that way, Holloway could do that. Like the sort. I mean, at least he could. The sort of like intense mid-range feinting volume pressure that Zabit applied almost instantly at the beginning of his fight with Kattar and maintained for a good half of that fight was very effective. And that is kind of Holloway classic.
That was basically what I was going to say. Like, those are things that Holloway does really, really well.
Sorry to steal the point.
No, it's so I think that is a big hurdle for Kattar to overcome. I think he has to find a way to be aggressive early, because both of these guys build. But I don't think Kattar can afford to put himself in there. Kattar is not going to be able to build a technical edge over a fight in the same way he could against people like, I don't know, Jeremy Stephens. He does not outclass Max Holloway to that extent. He cannot afford to give away early rounds. So I think the main question for Kattar is, how can he be aggressive early?
Yeah, well, first I want to say, does he have to worry about? Because here's the thing: we know Max Holloway historically builds and everything. Calvin Kattar certainly has better defense. He's got a very sturdy chin. We know we have seen him come back several times over the course of his UFC career. He's got better defense than Brian Ortega. Like, I almost think we just saw Alexander Volkanovski get beaten up, sort of, for 2 rounds, and then just kind of come back. And part of that was clever adjustments and so on and so forth. Part of it was the sort of complicated dance he and Holloway were engaged in. But part of it was also just that Volkanovski, like, hit a point where he was like, I have to come forward and throw punches. And I have to insist on doing that even if he's throwing back. And that's how I win. Like, that was, at the end of the day, that was the broad strokes adjustment Volkanovski made to beat Holloway, is that he stopped letting Holloway push him backwards. And like, we've seen Kattar reach that point. And the thing with Max Holloway is that, like, he doesn't hit all that hard. it is a matter of volume and building and breaking the opponent down over the course of usually 5 rounds. So like, I kind of think there is an outside chance that, I agree, that sounds like a very winnable fight for Holloway up to a point. But I kind of wonder what happens if Kattar fights exactly as he always does, gets pushed back, and then just reaches a point where he says fuck it and starts throwing 4-punch combinations hard. And trading with Max Holloway. Cause I think he could afford to do that. He's got the reach. He's a significantly bigger hitter as far as we can tell. Very durable, and he pretty much always comes to that point, even against Zabit, whom, as we said, was kind of dominating Kattar for the first 2 rounds of their fight. So, but granted, Zabit historically slows down, Max Holloway historically doesn't, but I can't get the image of Holloway losing the 4th and 5th rounds, or at least certainly the 5th round, as you said, to Volkanovski, and that was definitely like one of the clearer rounds in that fight, I think. So, I don't know. Although I did rewatch it recently, and I did sort of come away this time feeling that Max Holloway won. So my mind keeps changing. I don't know. It's my old feeling on that fight was that he came in with these new adjustments and then sort of lost them, but I'm not 100% sure that happened actually. He kept going for the high kicks and stuff, the interesting new combinations. He kept throwing the counter punches. It was a very close fight. Very close.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that there's a chance that Kattar just stays dangerous. Cause we've seen Holloway build. We have that pattern set in our minds, which is fair, but only slightly less impressed is the pattern of Calvin Kattar, sort of getting pushed around until he hits the point where he realizes he has to throw down. And, I think that's bound to happen in this fight, especially if Holloway's early pressure is that effective. I think Kattar has to respond one way. And I don't think he's the type to lie down. So
the one thing is, I do think a big part, so on the Holloway side, I think it's still interesting to think about how much of a different fighter Holloway looks when he's not confident of establishing his jab.
Yeah.
And is someone who I think will be able to effectively, either because he's fighting southpaws or he's just that he's just worried of the specific counters they've got. That was the whole Volkanovski trick in the first fight. He's just low kicking him whenever he was putting his lead hand out there. Mm-hmm. So I am interested to see if Kattar can force a low pace out of Holloway, because we haven't seen tremendous pace out of Holloway recently. And I think it's because his jab has been being taken away from him. It's not particularly might be Holloway getting gun shy, but I think it is. I think it is at least partially because he needs to build from that piece. On the other hand, though, I still think that foot speed thing for Kattar might be a issue, just because of how he throws punches. He does step into shots, the Lamas knockout and so on, but he's not really generally that willing to to really go after people. We think of the Aldo. Think of the Aldo combinations that Aldo chased him down with, or just the Poirier stuff. We're probably going to be talking relatively soon about how Poirier shifting after Conor McGregor might be a bit of a problem, but against Max Holloway it worked great.
Yeah.
Is Kattar going to chase Holloway that deep?
Does
Kattar chase people that deep?
That is an extremely good point. Because Calvin Kattar, of course, is convinced that if he had 2 more rounds against Zabit Magomedsharipov, he would have won, no question. And maybe he's right. Just because of how badly Zabit does seem to, gas. But, man, I don't know if you've gone back and rewatched that one recently.
Yes, I have.
Very frustrating round 3. Very frustrating. because Calvin Kattar is definitely getting into the fight in a way he has not for the first 2 rounds, and yet he can't cut Zabit off, and so he like just can't seem to. He sort of gets stuck in that mode, when you're gonna like take the free kick on goal, and you do all of those tiny little adjustment steps as you run up to the ball. And then like you realize you don't have your rhythm right and you feel like you have to do 800 more adjustment steps, but the ball's right there and you're not ready to kick yet. So then you have to start over. It's like that. Where he just constantly is like gathering his feet up, trying to get set right in front of Zabit to plant and throw those big bombs. And, just can't do it, and then gets desperate and goes for a knee and gets taken down. In the last 25 seconds of that fight, he's on his back, stuck. So very frustrating because, as you say, Kattar is maybe not that if he takes over, it's going to be like in the exchanges, which it was there, but then actually like walking the opponent down, doesn't seem to be all that natural to him. I would agree with you on that. So, yeah, I don't know.
I'm curious to see if talked about Holloway taking elements of the low kick. I think Kattar will probably do the same.
Yeah, they kind of both have done that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Kattar will look at the Volkanovski game plan. He'll be like, because Kattar does like his empty low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that like the Volkanovski 2 might actually work quite well for Holloway as like a training to counter that. I'm not sure if that's worked quite as well as it did.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. So if I had to abstract all of that into like a prediction, I would probably say like I think Kattar will have tremendous power to slow Holloway's roll in this fight, but I am less convinced of his ability to take over the fight, if that makes sense. So we may be looking at, I don't know, spicy early rounds. We're guaranteed to get some fun exchanges, but I think it may sort of, it seems like it could sort of just settle into a sort of a simmer at some point. It could also just be a fucking barn burner, as is often the case when you have two, like, Holloway certainly is in the past been pathologically aggressive. Kattar, like in his way, is. They both have long reach, which tends to be a recipe when two long-armed guys fight each other. You either get more of a staring match or you get an absolute war, an absolute technical war, because both of them realize they can hit each other at their normal safe range. So I don't know. But given what we saw in Kattar Zabit, I think Holloway is going to be the one who has an easier time like dictating rounds. And that for Kattar, it's going to be much more up to getting singular moments, which will probably happen, but will it happen like 3 to 5 times? I don't know. I'm going to pick Holloway.
Yeah. I think if Kattar can consistently push Holloway backwards, if he can jab with him,
That's big.
All these things like work for him more, but like he just hasn't shown the ability to like really pressure people.
Yeah.
And his tendency to like wait until he's got his reads, and as you said, to kind of line up the crosshairs. I think that gives Max Holloway a bit too much time to just start setting up angles on him, start doing what Zabit did. But Max Holloway can do it for longer and can do it better.
Yes. The flow is significantly stronger in Holloway's case. All right. Well, let's take a break then. When we come back, Michael Chiesa versus Neil Magny and, more. Ponzinibbio Leach, Condit Brown, Joaquin Buckley. It's fighting an Italian man. All of that and more after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on. We're jumping around here, right up to this midweek January 20th card, and its main event, Michael Chiesa versus... Who's the other guy? Oh yeah, Neil Magny. Interesting fight. Perplexing fight, one might say. Phil, do you want to introduce both me and the listeners to your perspective?
Well, I mean, I do actually really like this fight. I think it's a perfect matchup for two flawed, interesting fights who probably... I think, well, I don't know, because you can't really tell from perspective of Michael Chiesa. I mean, he's looked fantastic lately.
Right.
But, you know, they're both guys that I don't think many people would have necessarily pegged for title contention.
No.
And
they took the back road, both of them.
And, you know, both, as we said, like, visibly quite flawed. I think, you know, that there's a significant question to ask in this fight, and it is, can Neil Magny defend takedowns?
I'm going to go ahead and confidently say yes. Sometimes. Every now and then.
Prime Carlos Condit could defend takedowns sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Both men, particularly easy for people like Johnny Hendricks to just take down over and over again. And to Carlos Condit's credit, probably more happened after that, Johnny Hendricks takedowns for him than did for Magny. But you know, Magny's gotten better too, okay? I know everyone's excited. Michael Chiesa looks like a big, like, stupid muscle freak now. He went from, like, getting sand kicked in his face as a lightweight to just being a welterweight Hulk. But, Neil Magny's looked good this year too, Phil. He has also stepped up and improved his game. Right? I don't know if in the realm of takedown defense, necessarily. Is that your point? Is that his lingering flaw?
I mean, because Magny is such a weird guy. But he's someone where if you don't come at him with the right approach, you're guaranteeing yourself to a horrible slog. And he's going to be extremely hard, and he's never going to get tired. And he's going to just throw tons of strikes from range. He's going to beat you, and he's going to be active in the clinch. And even if he doesn't, you know, do certain things that, he's just going to be a really tough out. And on the other hand, he's just got certain fights where he just gets absolutely wiped off the face of the earth. And
yeah.
They're mostly people who can push him into the fence and low kick him, or push him into the fence and wrestle him, or some combination of the two. Sort of what RDA did to him. So, like, I mean, the Maya, Larkin, Ponzinibbio, and RDA fights are all absolute obliterations.
Yeah.
To the extent where you'd be like, how could this person... Something is wrong with your game to the extent, like, you know, you cannot improve your way out of these losses because you're not even, like, landing a significant punch on pretty much any of these people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one round isn't, I would say in Neil Magny's defense that one round is not, does not exist in a vacuum. And that's certainly the first round, where a lot of these tones get set, is not where Neil Magny looks his best ever. So like the Lorenz Larkin fight, it is definitely, like, it does suggest something is wrong with Magny's game, but I would say more specifically, it screams that something is definitely wrong with Magny's game at the beginning of the fight. But, he is a somewhat adaptive fighter, or at least a fighter with a ton of staying power. That may be more than the adaptive, side of things. But underrated in like toughness and grit is Neil Magny, said Mike Goldberg. And I think Accidental Goldberg, I'm starting the Twitter account. I think, is Michael Chiesa Lorenz Larkin? He is a little bit. He has a little bit of that like crazy early finisher in him. So I see your point. And he will.
Yeah, I think the question really is Michael Chiesa Damian Maia?
Yeah. Which is just like, obviously, he's from Sick Jitsu. He's from Sick Jitsu, so I find honestly it'd be an extremely insulting comparison. But I understand your point.
Because I think for me, the real like worrying part of that Magny fight of Magny versus Maia is not the first round, because Magny, he does get almost immediately taken down, but then so did lots and lots and lots of people, and he actually survives for 5 minutes, which is actually, he shows he has a very credible game off his back. It's the second round. It's the round where Magny came out. He knew he couldn't get pushed back into the fence by Maia, and he threw a ton of feints and strikes, was much more aggressive, coming forward much more, and then Damian Maia hit an open space takedown on him. Effortlessly.
Yeah, it's not a great sign, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously, Magny will chew Chiesa up if it's at range, but even then he's not he's Neil Magny, he's not a big hitter. The clinch could be super fun.
That I think
Chiesa has had his issues in the clinch before, Joe Lozon and so on. And Magny, I think, has a very unique, body lock game, it's with his own takedowns, but also he's gotten much better with knees and stuff, and shifting positions. He's a great clinch. So I do think, I will say, I did think his cage wrestling looked a bit improved against the Jingliang. He did got into positions where Liang was looking to lock his hands, and Magny denied it. He didn't let Jingliang turn the corner on him. But it's just the fact that I think I've seen Magny, he's been taken down with shot takedowns, he's been body locked. There isn't really a takedown. He is a bit like Carlos Conda. There isn't really a takedown that he doesn't like.
Yeah. But I will say this. Saying a takedown, you're sort of suggesting as a given that Magny is accepting these takedowns. But getting taken down twice by the leech in the first round is one thing. Immediately popping back up is something else. And Neil Magny also does that, I think, better than ever. I think this is another aspect of his game that he has improved, is I think Magny's experience has made him a better strategic thinker. Or at least wired better strategy into the way he fights. So he can still give up takedowns as he always did. I think that definitely suggests that there's just something fundamental in Magny, is if it's a foot speed thing, if it's a length of limb combined with being a slow twitch muscle guy kind of thing, that he just doesn't explode out of in that moment of first contact on takedowns the way other fighters do. But he's also a fantastic grappler, and technically he can do a great technical stand-up the moment his butt hits the mat. And there I think his weirdly long torso also helps him, because it's kind of hard to actually put him on his back when he has it in mind not to play guard. And I would think he would come into this fight not wanting to do that. I'd still a very different question, escaping Michael Chiesa's takedowns and top control. But I don't think Chiesa it would be content in a Johnny Hendricks sort of way to just maintain position either. I think he would allow scrambles. So it sounds like a terrible way to begin the fight. I think you have definitely hit upon like the sort of the broad trends that usually seems to determine fights like this. Sort of the core of the matchup. But I'm not 100% sure that just giving up takedowns to Chiesa is like a guaranteed loss. Neil Magny, pretty good grappler. Not bad. And Michael Chiesa, much as he may have improved, not Damian Maia. Who has a process, that is as like beautifully pared down and direct as Maia's was at that stage in his MMA career? Like
Rafael dos Anjos, who also did it to Damian Maia, like to Neil Magny.
To Neil Magny, yeah, yeah, that's fair enough.
After knocking him down with a low kick.
Yep, that's fair enough.
Admittedly, he didn't take him down, but
yeah, but I do want to say,
I mean,
oh yeah, go on.
It's also just that, like, again, not particularly MMA mathing it too much, but Conda is a bit of a Magny analog. That he's just going to be there as a gamer for the whole fight. He's going to be tireless. Obviously, Conda, in his prime, had a ton more power than Magny.
Yeah.
Did and does. And Chiesa just completely wiped him off the face of the...
It's true.
Just wiped him off the cage. Like, he just wasn't very competitive at all. And he didn't look like he was getting tired. And again, controlled RDA fairly effectively for 3 rounds and looked sort of fine at the end of it. So,
yeah,
I do like Neil Magny a lot. I think this might be a rough one for him.
I'll say this in Neil Magny's defense. He and Carlos Condit have each learned things. Like Carlos Condit late in his career sort of became more Neil Magny. Like the Nick Diaz fight. It was a very Magny sort of outboxing performance. Becoming like a less just all out violent, more sort of, tactical, savvy sort of fighter. But he never improved the core of being Carlos Condit, which really is getting taken down. Like that is at the heart of what makes Carlos Condit so great. And he never messed with that. Neil Magny, I think he has gotten noticeably better in both his actual just straight up wrestling technique and his physicality. It has to be said, Michael Chiesa had a crazy transformation. Neil Magny, though, more gradually has gotten visibly stronger. So I think that helps, but also just the way he thinks about it. It never changed for Carlos Condit. He is still the guy who, if you take him down, he's going to sit there spending 5 minutes trying to hit a switch or a triangle and cycling between those things. And I love it. I love Carlos Condit's guard, but it is what it is at this point. Neil Magny's, approach to being taken down, I think has transformed as he's gained experience as a fighter. And the thing I want to, linger on, is, as you mentioned, the clinch fighting. I think that's a really interesting area of this fight. You and I were both stunned by Chiesa's ability to hit open space takedowns on RDA and distance, shot takedowns, double legs and things like that. And obviously that's going to work against Neil Magny. Obviously. But Michael Chiesa also gets a lot of, still a majority of his takedowns in the clinch. And I'm not sure that Michael Chiesa himself is I don't want to ignore the fact that he can also get taken down by Neil Magny, who is a very good takedown artist, in addition to being a just well-rounded, complete clinch fighter. I think the case for Chiesa throughout his career that makes his numbers look better than Magny's has mostly been that people don't want to take him down. Because while Magny is a good grappler, he's not super dangerous unless he's on top of you striking you. Whereas Michael Chiesa is a venomous grappler in transitions. Even if put on his back, the chance of a scramble where he gets to your back and chokes you out is too high, so people don't try. But those who have gotten him down. Joe Lozon got him down twice. as like a significantly smaller man who was also just sort of chewing Chiesa up in the clinch otherwise. I know that was a while ago. But people who have tried to take Chiesa down have succeeded. Beneil Dariush succeeded and then got submitted, showing why people, even good grapplers, don't often just go right away to start trying to take Chiesa down. But I don't know. I think Magny will. And I think it could really alter this fight. Both of these guys have great stamina and conditioning. We haven't seen Chiesa in a 5-rounder, but as you noted before we began the segment, he's never looked like a guy who gets tired in round 3. There's no reason to suspect he won't be a capable 5-round fighter. I don't know. I think, I have to agree. Like I said, I think you hit upon, usually it's like the most boring, reductive shit imaginable that is really at the heart of picking a matchup correctly. And I think, Chiesa likes to pressure, and even now Magny gets pressured and gets put against the fence by everyone he fights. And Chiesa's an aggressive takedown artist, and Magny loves to get taken down. I think those are really the two core sort of nodes of this matchup. And that's why I will be picking Michael Chiesa. But I think Neil Magny is, I don't know. He has surprised me in 2020, Phil. I'll say that much. I think he has gotten markedly better, and just because it's taken longer, it seems less dramatic than Chiesa's transformation into, as I said, a welterweight Hulk. But, strong, savvy Neil Magny is also a thing. And, I don't know. I'm kind of excited for it.
I still really like Magny, but I've sort of given up, hoping for him to surprise me against elite competition. Because he tends to get run out of the water against them. So yeah, I've got to pick Chiesa. That performance against RDA. You can criticize a lot of Chiesa's performance as being, a lot of Chiesa's wins as being, he might have caught people at the right times or at the right, I've just got a sort of fortuitous submission. If you're someone who really likes, for example, Beneil Dariush and RDA and Massa and Duba,
Joe Lozon even, since perhaps, that was a doctor stoppage.
Yep. But if you like those fighters, you might dislike Michael Chiesa. But I think you really can't front on that RDA fight. It was fantastic, strategic performance, and he just shut RDA out to the extent that people were like, "Oh, RDA sucks now,"
and he doesn't, as we saw. He was definitely powerfully undersized in a way that I think we can both agree definitely affected the dynamic of that matchup. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case here. But yeah, it was Michael Chiesa's most complete, streamlined performance without a doubt.
It was the first time I've seen Michael Chiesa, and I thought that might be a contender.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, I got to pick him.
Whereas Neil Magny, even if he does contend, is much more in a Leon Edwards sort of and he's not even as athletic or scary in singular moments as Leon Edwards, but it has more of that feel of can you really make this work? I have to see it. Can you make this sort of let the other guy sort of do what he wants kind of style work at the highest level? It's a much thinner line, I think. It's the thing with Chiesa's win over RDA is that it was decisive. It was so decisive. And even, granted, Magny's win over the Leech, very clear. The wins over Martin and Lawler were no less clear, but even in that Lawler fight, there were moments where not a lot was happening, and Lawler, if he had not been so frustrated already, would have backed Magny up to the fence and gotten some work done. So, yeah.
And just RDA is just a much better fighter than all those people at this stage in his career.
Yeah,
it's just a much better win.
Has to be said. Yeah, and certainly if we're talking about people making tremendously good strategic decisions, the fact that the Leech made all of the worst strategic decisions of his entire MMA career in that one fight with Magny, also helped Magny to look even more dominant. So yeah, I tend to agree. I'm looking forward to it though. I think it's an interesting matchup. I'm still ready to be surprised by Neil Magny, even though I think you're right. Okay. Let's take one more break. When we come back, undercards after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's go ahead and jump on back in time from January 20th back to January 16th. I want to look a little more thoroughly at this Holloway versus Kattar undercard. And right off the bat, Carlos Conda versus Matt Brown is sometimes you get a fight that's past its sell-by date, in a way that absolutely sucks. And I'm not sure what kind of, has this fight, festered or has it fermented? That's what I want to know, Phil. Have both of these guys declined at a similar enough rate that this matchup, which I desperately wanted to see, I think like right at the time around the time this show began. In fact, I think years ago when we had Matt Brown on this show and I, told him that he was a judo brown belt because it said so on his Wikipedia. And he said, "Oh yeah, I didn't know that either." I think that was, before the fight with Conda. In fact, I seem to recall the intense feeling of disappointment, which has now become like so familiar to me as someone who works in the MMA media sphere, that I had of like getting this big break, getting to talk to Matt Brown. And then like the next day, the fight got canceled because Matt Brown got injured. So that was great. But, I want to know, Phil, like, what do you think? Have both these guys degraded at a similar enough rate that we might still get something approximating that matchup, or should we be expecting something completely different because they're two old, fragile men?
You know what? I was thinking this was probably going to suck, but weirdly enough, when these kind of matches are made, and yes, this goes to your point about Tyson Roy Jones Jr. They actually tend to be all right.
Right.
I remember when everyone thought the boat had sailed on Duck versus Wanderlei, and pretty great. Mm-hmm. And Big Nog versus Couture, great. And one of the best heavyweight fights ever.
Shogun versus Little Nog, 9.
Yeah.
We just saw the 9th fight between those two men, and it was still pretty good, if we're honest. It was not a bad fight.
It was super solid.
Uh-huh.
I think there's something about, people, there is something about people fighting, against people that they know, even if they don't necessarily know, they haven't fought them before.
Because it means something to them.
They're sort of the same level of experience. They're not going to be expecting them to do crazy young person things.
Yeah, and I think there's like an amount of like professional respect and pride on the line as well. Like, I don't know, like we came up together, like we're playing the same game. Matt Brown, let me put it this way. I have absolute confidence that Matt Brown will go in there and try to kill Carlos Condit. It's Carlos Condit that I'm more worried about because he's the one who's like, matured as a fighter in a less violent direction. And then became a much less inspired version of his former self as an old fighter. So, I mean, Matt Brown's, his last fight was an example of it, definitely of like a decaying game on an older man, but, it was a violent turnaround. Not, he didn't go quietly into that good night. He tried to kill Miguel Baeza and they just got killed in return. So, well, I'm glad to see you on my side, Phil. I really thought you were going to be just sort of hard set against this matchup on principle because obviously it's not the kind of fight I mean, we didn't name a handy after Phil McKenzie's desire to see two evenly matched old men fight each other.
To be fair, like I'm perfectly down with the old man fights.
Sure,
I only play up the
you are.
like snuffing them at the end of their careers thing. I mean, the only thing is like I only root for the like Pereira down because otherwise fighters don't know when to give it up.
Yeah.
But like
Conda
and Brown, I genuinely think that the two of them are like, okay, this is pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I think so.
People genuinely are genuinely like, yes, I would like to finish my career, you know, going after fights with my peers. Like, I am fine with that. Mm-hmm. It's if people are like, oh no, I've totally still got it. Then you can fight Michel Pereira.
Yeah.
Or Cowboy Oliveira. But yeah, I think you've nailed it this time. The main problem is, the main worry in this one is Condit. I think he would have been reasonably heavily favored if they fought in their primes.
Sure.
I think that, you know, Matt Brown's ability to push people into the fence and then fuck them up for being there probably would have been like a big problem for Condit, but he could have just been bailed out by the fact that he was an immortal.
Mm-hmm.
I think over
ironic, sort of, isn't
like,
it?
Oh yeah, yeah, and over like a longer fight, he probably would have eventually, because he would do that at his best. He probably would have opened up Brown's glass body.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big part of his win over Campman in the second one, is that he just gassed Campman out by beating the shit out of him to the.
And if it were a slightly later career Carlos Condit, which may be relevant to this matchup, I think he may have also started to out-wrestle Matt Brown.
Yeah, that would be weird.
Right? But it probably, I think if it were like the Condit who fought Campman at the second time, like that was a Carlos Condit who loved taking people down against the fence. And Matt Brown has always loved getting taken down. Almost as much as Neil Magny. So.
Almost as much as Carlos Condit.
Yeah, right. It's kind of
wrestling.
weird.
This would be a weird wrestling exchange fight.
Matt Brown also like worked on his wrestling late career.
Yep.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see these two dudes. We probably will see them trying to take each other down.
We will see them successfully take each other down.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the things which would make the fight fun, is that they'll both be pretty difficult to keep down.
Yeah.
And yeah, they'll both, you know, in the same way that sort of, you know, it was one of the dynamics that made the Nog Shogun fights work.
This is going to sound crazy. I kind of favor Matt Brown on the ground in this matchup. I don't know if this will be a defining characteristic, but I kind of think at this stage, like I have seen more recently, like effective, aggressive guard grappling out of Matt Brown. Like that it has at least caused scrambles and allowed the fight to change position. And there was something else I was going to say too about Matt Brown's wrestling being better. I don't think that was the point I was going to make, but Carlos Condit's grappling, I don't, his bottom game has like, since he learned to hit a switch, he's like hasn't really visibly progressed beyond that. And he also like has not been that super effective offensively off of his back in quite some time, it has to be said. Whereas yeah, Matt Brown like actually has been like hitting near triangles on people and stuff like that for a while now. So I don't know. I kind of favor Matt Brown in that phase, if I'm honest.
I mean, I think Conda is never really talked about as an MMA athlete, because he isn't one, but right. He did have some absurd physical traits, which I think he absolutely leveraged in his fights a lot.
Chin.
Just the infinite chin and cardio.
Yeah.
Which meant that he would just, back away at people from the bottom until they did something, and then would get back to his feet and just then be throwing millions of punches. And, I think Matt Brown has aged better because he had to build a style that didn't involve him being like completely unkillable on the feet.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Completely unable to run out of steam.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but Carlos Condit is like a technical fighter whose ability to be technical rested almost entirely on the fact that he could afford to just eat counters until he hit upon the attack that his opponent either could not counter successfully or would get hit while countering. That was usually how it would work out. Like, I still think the Thiago Alves finish is the ultimate example of how Carlos Condit's like rinse and repeat trial by fire style of striking worked. Is that he's like, okay, I'm going to walk in with this weird prefab combination. Oh, I got hit with a huge left hook that would have felled a mortal man. Okay, I'm going to go in and try this other combination. Oh, huge left hook. After like 5 of those, he's like, I guess I'm going to get hit by the left hook. So how can I hurt him while he's left hooking me? And that's how the finish comes about. That's very Carlos Condit. He can't do that anymore. Whereas Matt Brown can, to your point, can still do a lot of the things that Matt Brown, spent his career learning to do.
Yes.
So.
And yeah, so I don't think I think that goes back to the first point. Matt Brown doesn't look like he's lost the confidence in his game.
Yeah.
Still looks like Matt Brown, just slower, older Matt Brown. It's Condit. I mean, the fight against Court McGee was something of a return to form.
Mm-hmm.
It was only really when he hurt McGee that he looked like Carlos Condit again.
Yes, yeah.
Then once he realized he couldn't get McGee out of there, he went back to just sort of drifting around, throwing single strikes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think if he smells blood, we can see him again, but I think I just trust Matt Brown more at this stage. I trust him. Like, he still looks dynamic. He's still a finishing threat. Finishing Diego and Ben Saunders, not the greatest finishes nowadays, but it's been a long time since Carlos Condit has actually finished anyone.
Yeah. And like I said before, he came perfectly close to finishing Miguel Baeza. Just a much younger, healthier man. Couldn't be put away. But yeah, I agree. I think gotta favor Matt Brown as just like, yeah, this is honestly sort of like in a weird way, even though, as you said, Carlos Condit is not an athletic freak, it is still sort of like a schlubby Schadenfreude kind of win that we're predicting, because it's essentially a career of not being able to get away with all the shit Carlos Condit could always get away with that caused Matt Brown to now be the guy that we are expecting to win the fight between the two of them. So we'll see if we're right or not.
Someone on Twitter posted the one of those, I think one of many, when he was fighting Tyron Woodley, and he just came forward and he's like out of position, hunched over.
Yep.
And Woodley just like hits him pretty much as hard as he can. Conda's just like, ouch. Like, he just sort of takes a few steps backwards. Like,
can you imagine how much more, just by body language and style and temperament and everything, really, how much more like Saprabek Safarov Carlos Condit would seem if he wasn't so hot?
Yeah.
There is so much about Carlos Condit that is just like weird fight creep. He's just very handsome. But he has this weird hunched over posture. It's sort of a really ugly style at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But it rules. And it's just because he's hot. All right. Next fight. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Li Jingliang. With these, like, all these welterweight matchups between this and the, Magny Chiesa, that main event, I feel like we've talked about, like, the same 3 fighters over and over. Every one of them has fought Neil Magny, essentially, is the rule about their welterweight division. But, like, literally, Carlos Condit, Ponzinibbio, and the Leech have all fought Neil Magny. Okay. So what do you think of this one? Santiago Ponzinibbio, you pointed this out to me. I didn't realize how long he had really been away. It has been since, literally, against Neil Magny was his last fight, and that was in November of 2018. Very long time ago. And it's kind of hard to tell what's been going on with him. There was one fight made in December of 2019, which was canceled because he got a staph infection. Ponzinibbio did. And otherwise, that's the only booking that I can find any obvious evidence of. The Leech, on the other hand, also had his last fight against Neil Magny, and was probably the worst performance of his whole career, if we're being honest. So, I don't know. What do you think? One guy's been away way too long, and may have been sort of reaching a point where he was about to age out of his prime anyway. And who knows? Maybe the Leech ran through his prime early or something. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real weird...
It feels like it would have been way more exciting like a year and a half ago, right? Like, I would have been going nuts about this matchup.
Also, I would have been expecting the Leech to get destroyed.
Yeah. I would have expected him to get nearly destroyed and then go to war and then probably lose. But it would have been great.
Yeah. It's the Zaleski dos Santos fight. It's so anomalous. Li Jingliang.
Mm-hmm.
That, because normally he's been so vulnerable early, he's been, just incredibly hittable. And it was the fact that he just dismantled, Santos on the feet. Like low kicks and jabs and right hands.
Yep.
And then he looked sort of impotent against Neil Magny.
He looked terrible.
I don't really know what the difference is. I'm wondering whether it's just the fact that Neil Magny has just a really active jab.
I think that's it. I think it's the reach. I think it just made him intensely uncomfortable like a minute into that fight. Which maybe suggests he didn't have any good sparring against a tall guy. You'd think he would come in, like at least having known how that felt, but from body language alone, that was my initial read, and it's the one I still believe in the most, that like, he just hated how it felt being at distance with Neil Magny, and instantly was thinking like, I have to get inside, I hate this, I have to take him down, I have to go back to, the fighting style that actually earned me the nickname the Leech in the first place, which is being a boring top position guy. And that doesn't work against Neil Magny, not unless you're like actually like really good at that stuff. And the Leech is just kind of okay at it. But I think it was the reach. I mean, do you have a different theory?
Oh, I mean, I don't really, to be honest. I think it's not just the reach. It's that Zaleski doesn't really have a punch that he doesn't have a building strike. Start his combinations with. And so he was just trying to figure out what he was going to be throwing at Liang, whilst Jing Liang was just walking him down with right hand low kick.
Sort of Conda-esque, from Zaleski, honestly.
Yeah.
And his chin was not up to being used that way.
And so that means I got to pick Ponzinibbio. Which I guess is a bit of a cheat pick. I mean, he does just have, the better wins overall.
Yeah.
He also does have like a super active jab.
Yes.
And, pairs it with a really good eye poke.
A great, probably the best in the game. I mean, now the Leech might have something to say about that, Phil, but it's a question of position. Right? The Leech really has to be like sitting on your chest to do the most effective eye poke in his arsenal, whereas Ponzinibbio's is a very dynamic weapon.
Yeah.
It can be used at virtually any range in the midst of an exchange. No, I really do think there's just something to be said for the fact that Ponzinibbio is just like, I mean, we assume, who knows how he'll look? We have to assume he'll come back looking good. And he's just got a really pleasing, like, meat and potatoes kickboxing game. It's like, he's kind of like bang average as far as MMA athletes go, which is not to say that he's a way better athlete than most of us normal people. And that's just kind of how his game operates. Like, he's a pleasant mix of, like, volume and staying power and, like, actual finishing potential. He will absolutely throw down and can counter people, but he will also pressure. he's like, he moves really well. So like he has that jab that you mentioned, but it doesn't just initiate like further combinations. He's not 100% tied to just being all out aggressive all the time. He can jab and then take angles and then continue the attack, or jab and then disengage. He's just a really flexible fighter because he's just got like good fundamental technique. And, yeah, you do just kind of have to assume he beats the Leech. But it's a huge question mark, because if the Leech looks like he did previously, then I don't 100% know how Ponzinibbio does against like if the Leech could do what he did to Zaleski. And right off the bat, as you said, I agree, way more difficult just given the fact that Ponzinibbio has a jab. But if he can land good counters and move as well as he did in that fight, I'm not 100% sure how well Ponzinibbio does against that.
I mean, I don't like
the closest fight. The closest parallel to that would be the Nordine Taleb fight, which was exceedingly close.
I mean, he does. Ponzinibbio does lots of like nice things offensively. Like he's very crafty, but he has had some hard fights against people who are not all that like. He made Mike Perry look like Mike Perry might be something.
Right.
Like it was like a lot of that fight hinged on him landing a stupid spinning back fist on Mike Perry.
I mean, he does at a certain point. He does just kind of end up exchanging with everyone. So yeah, people who can succeed in exchanges, which the Leech historically definitely can, always get moments. And weirdly enough, even though he has way more catastrophic failures of defense, I think the Leech is actually a better defensive fighter than Ponzinibbio at his best. It just takes a round for him to realize that usually. But, I think he's actually got like a little more subtlety in footwork and head movement, where Ponzinibbio is like really offensively minded. I think that may be the thing with Ponzinibbio is like, for him, footwork is a tool you use to keep your weapons aimed at the other guy, and to keep yourself almost close enough to hit him at any moment.
I think the Leech genuinely wants to be like good,
yes,
all-around striker.
Yeah,
just that he's just quite a clunky dude with a huge head.
Yeah, he does have a big old noggin. Well, I just hope that both of these guys look good. You know, I hope the Leech got that shit out of his system or is like really hyped up to prove a point. I hope Ponzinibbio only benefits from that rest. Who knows? Sometimes it happens. People come back and they just needed the time off or whatever, and they just look like their old selves. And if they do, it's a pretty easy pick for Ponzinibbio, but it's also a guaranteed exciting matchup. And even if they look like shit, probably some silly stuff is going to happen. So good fight. Looking forward to it. Okay. Well, that's Heavy Hands. Quite a lot of good fights coming up this week. Doesn't feel like too much. Not yet because of our nice, well-deserved break. But we are excited to see some big deal MMA action in the octagon once again. And, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to us, convince ourselves that we are excited about it. It feels good to anticipate a fight for once rather than just sort of looking at Wikipedia on Monday and being like, oh, that's happening this week. Okay. Phil, do you have anything coming out this week that you would like to plug?
I do not. I'm starting 2021 as lazily as I went through 2020.
Beautiful, right? Why change what works? As for me, I will have something coming out this week, probably on Holloway Kattar, but I don't know what it is yet. But I've been tasked. So, can't plug it specifically, but keep your eyes on Bloody Elbow, Thursday, Friday, somewhere around there. Something on Calvin Kattar or Max Holloway or both. So look forward to that. That's a lot to get excited about, and I'm sure all of you are every bit as excited as I want you to be right now. Thank you, all of you, for listening. Thank you for joining us, and for starting off 2021 the right way. By the way, if you haven't heard the Handies, it was 3 hours long. You should go listen to it if you have a large block of time. We had a blast, lots of great awards, and another thank you to all of our wonderful listeners who contributed categories and nominees. We had a great time doing that, and I think we're going to have a great time throughout the rest of this year. Things are only looking up for Heavy Hands. Find Phil on social media at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Twitter. Find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And find both of our writing and whatnot on BloodyElbow.com. Check out our Patreon. There will be bonus episodes that come out of this episode because segment 3 was way too long. So make sure you check out the Patreon for a bonus episode that should hopefully have gone up before you even hear this. And until next week, when we will be talking to you about Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 2, I just have to say, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.